so the gentleman's just going to pop in a slide, and I was conversing with my colleague here. That's it. So I put together 4 questions, and I've assigned people, but Anne was just suggesting that we can probably see it all disappear. No, here we go. I mean, if people are comfortable with just, these aren't, what's that?
Yeah, like either one, you just do roundtable or split it.
We can either do it as a group. There's not that many of us, and we seem to be able to communicate reasonably well around the table. And just say, talk about these things. And I guess I think there are people who are both obviously in the room, and I know some people outside the room that would be interested in what our opinions are, because this is probably not. You're not going to hear this discussed in most of the sessions in the PDAC, and unfortunately, those environments don't allow for any interactivity by and large. So it's set pieces by knowledgeable people about topics, whereas here we have a huge amount of experience. I remember I did a mentoring exercise about 1.5 years ago, and I asked 60 colleagues for input to advise some young geologists about a career in the business. And I thought about it for a bit, and I realized that I said there was something like 2,500 years of experience. And all of that, 2.5 millennia of experience on the various people that had. Holy crap! I've never really touched anything that had 2,500 years associated with it, but it was true. And so I think there's whether it's it appears in something like the PDAC or the Econ Geology or the newsletter, people would like to know what because events like John was talking about this morning, the metal Earth. I mean, the Australians, of course, they had the glass Earth, and I thought it was ironic. One's very opaque and one's very transparent. These things there's processes in a way. If you have a freeway, people are going to drive along the freeway. And so universities need to be fed, students need to be graduated, and all the rest of it. But at some point, I think part of the reason for generating this opportunity was, what do we potentially, should we look at adding to it? And as Craig said, in a way, he says, there's no really flies on us at the moment. And I won't show my Trump stripes because I have none. But if you look at it in a sort of a nationalistic sense, the countries like Australia and Canada are facing some serious issues with mineral prospectivity. And those things are so important for our economies. I look at the whole northern scene now in Canada, and I'm thinking, the government should be supporting it just to have a way to put an economic viability around the north. Forget about what money Glencore makes or Teck or the others, but those people up there, we kind of owe them. We have to have something that actually works.
So we call that geomapping for energy and minerals?
Well, the other thing is national sovereignty.
$200 million on over the last 10 years?
Well,
in addition to the actual internal resources that went with it, so
yeah.
I think we actually have been doing exactly that.
Yeah, I know, but then industry actually has to be
versus an
successful.
industry that has a GDP or a 65 billion, something like that in 2015, is 200 million a lot? I don't know.
We probably need to.
You got to service an industry, right?
Yeah, so you raise a point. It's sort of not ever spoken out in polite circles. And I will deny I ever said this or brought it up in this meeting, but if you really legitimately look at Canada, the GDP of Canada on an annual basis is $2 billion. The metallic mineral production, in addition to that, on an annual basis is $20 billion. It's 1% of the overall economy. What the salvation is of the minerals industry, in terms of having a heightened importance, is where that $20 billion is produced from. And it's not produced from downtown Toronto. It's actually the Flin Flons and the Sudburys and Timmins and the areas that are as important to politicians and Canadians as downtown Toronto.
Disproportionately important.
Yeah, but keep in mind, before everyone starts running off going, Canada's lost without the natural resource industries, it's not quite. Australia's in a much more I think it's closer to 10% of the Australian.
It's about 8% of GDP, but it is 50% of all exports. Okay, so if you put it in that context, it's really important. And I'd say it's probably just as important for Canada.
Yeah, it is more in terms of.
Yeah, in terms of the export piece, yes, but it's, but.
Well, hang on a minute. You say that flippantly, like, oh, in terms of the export piece, yes. Well, hang on a minute. In terms of trade, it's bloody important. And just, Ken, what Craig said this morning, I was actually going to put a slide on that again, but crisis, what crisis? Generally, people react to something when there is a crisis, and right now there isn't a crisis in mineral production. Commodity prices are pretty low. Coming back up. So for the average person outside of this room, and even outside of this conference, there isn't a crisis. They still get the metal, they still got the iPhone, they still get so. The crisis is 15 or 20 years down the track.
Right.
And that's what we need to be able to communicate better. It's 20 years down the track. And what does that mean to the average Canadian or Australian? Well, it means that in 20 years' time, when you're old and sick and have to go to hospital, you can't because the country's not generating enough revenue. So that's why it's important. And the reason you need to do it now is because it takes us 20 years to find it, develop it, build the bloody mine, and start producing it and commodity out. So yes, the crisis is 20 years away. That's what we need to be saying. But why do we need to start now? Because it's going to take us 20 years to find it, to do the research work behind it, to improve exploration so that we can find the mine and develop it. That's the crisis. And we can't properly articulate that at the moment, and that's what's causing the problem.
Yeah, see,
Yep.
I think that is articulated, and there is good support in Canada for, there's even the current government who's not as supportive as the last one, is still very much engaged. So, being a bit facetious before about the terms of the relative economy of energy in Canada is Alberta alone is $80 billion a year. So, you have to put it all in that context. And yes, the export piece is important. And yes, I alluded to that this morning with the forestry sector in Canada. And I think one of the things that doesn't get done enough is bringing in a group like the forestry industry into a forum like this with FP Innovations would be a good example, where they would be able to give you a very good lesson on what happens when a crisis hits and how you have to respond and how you respond in a very short time frame, because they really did hit an absolute wall. Newspapers were still in vogue, and then all of a sudden they weren't, and it hit at exactly the same time as the Americans said, you're not going to ship out softwood lumber to us.
Right.
And so I think, this is valuable for them.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it's very valuable, but, maybe we need to start thinking in a little broader terms about what exactly, other parts of the natural resource sector. Energy's going through this now. One wag put it to me, well, at least in the metal side, you're not being told to keep your product in the ground, which is exactly what the hydrocarbon industry is being told right now. Is, by all means, bring it out, but we're actively working to the day where you don't bring it out of the ground. So these are all, different crises, if you want, that you're facing. And yes, we're 15 years down the road, but what can you do now to stave off that when the day of reckoning does come? And
Every year you postpone it and don't do the research or don't develop new technologies or don't get the right data to do it, is another year that the recovery takes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality. Unfortunately, most of us will be retired. And that, so are we really invested? We should say that some of us should be invested because they're not going to be around. Some of us want to leave a good legacy for the industry going forward, so we're trying to do something about it.
I think part of that, Mike, is that it's been touched on. It's what we leave the younger people coming into the business. Because in a way, we're not going to be there 15 or 20 years with any vitality to articulate these things. But if you have people that are aware of these issues, that are going to still be there in 20 years' time, then I think you have a chance, at least to have because nobody's going to take action now, I think. It's just not in the mindset of the public or industry to respond to things, even if we're being told that there was an asteroid coming. you know, in order for Hollywood to do it, it had to be arriving like in 72 hours, and people would pay attention. But if it was 20 years out, people would say, you know, that probably won't be around it. You know? Sure, it's gone. But I like Dave's comment about the innovation, and you mentioned this with forestry. We tend to be better when we're under pressure. But the thing is, at this point, we're under pressure, but it's sort of pressure of deflation as opposed to compression. You know, and if somebody, you know, said, well, I need an answer for an exploration problem with the existing data, people will rise to the occasion and make the effort. But if you give, I won't just say geophysics, the trap door of saying, oh, I need to run another model, I've got to get a better set of data, you know, or I'll spend the time, like Craig says, getting the crappy data out or the relevant data, they'll do it because they would rather defer making that decision. It's just the human nature. The belief is I can reduce the risk by being more certain of the model. And at some point, you can't. You just basically have to act on what you have. The forest industry had no choice. We often give ourselves choices because we think the smart guy across the room knows what he's talking about. He probably knows about the modeling, but he doesn't have diddly squat knowledge of actually, as we've said, about what the problem is actually people are trying to solve. So anyways, I suggest we take a break because our freshmen are here and they're warm. 3 o'clock, we come back. And do you want to vote, and do you want to do little breakout sessions, or would you just like to do a roundtable? I didn't think my questions were entirely dorky, but could also, it's a good bird. Sorry, no, it's got aphasia.
There was crummy data on the inversion.
Craig got to it. I did that once with a guy who started just his first presentation inside BHP. And I had to I'll call it a little bit of the pixie in me. So it was down Santiago, 100 people in BHP. I took his first slide and I rotated it just to see what his reaction would be. He actually handled it reasonably well. He didn't go tropo, and I thought, this guy's good. I can work with him. That's all right. So anyways, we break for 10, come back, and we'll figure out what to do with the questions. Oh, thanks.
I'll be done. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no separate.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Minimize the importance.
Yeah, that'll be here.
I have, excuse me, I have 2 commercials. There's no slide with it, but that's okay. Well, Charles historically, but not this time, actually one of Mike's people and I are chairing a session on the use of regional data Wednesday afternoon. It's a PDAC seminar workshop with DMEC, and I think there's still space. It should be very interesting. We've got Pete Betts, Stefan Thiel. Pete's from the University of Monash. Stefan is with the South Australian Mines Department and University of Adelaide. I've looked at both their PowerPoints. They're just awesome, awesome stuff. And then a couple of gentlemen from, one from Denver I work with, and Maite Sanchez, who's came out of UBC, MDRU, and Victoria Strichard from Natural Resources. Sorry? Sure.
And you can say Geological Survey of Canada.
Still, it's still acceptable. Yeah. Anyways, it's pretty cheap if you remember. I think it runs the afternoon. Anyways, we're going to look at the value of regional data sets. But one thing happened, and it is more. Some of the things we've been talking about. It's unfortunate. There was a mention of leadership at one point in building leadership, and that's one of the things. My personal feeling is the mining industry barely has management capabilities, let alone leadership. The leadership, unfortunately, is something which seems to just rise out, and people will stand up and they'll do something. And associated with this workshop, there was a gentleman by the name of David Boyd. And David Boyd just passed away. He was 90, and he had been at the University of Adelaide for, I think he joined in '69. and he retired in 92, but he still supervised students till 98. But what David had the opportunity to do was he worked in the late 50s and 60s. And this is going back, right? He worked for a company called Hunting Surveys in the UK. And it was established by, I believe, a war veteran, World War II veteran, as originally an aerial photography company. But they got into geophysical surveys and interpretation. And David worked for this company. At the same time, another iconic member of the community, who's actually still alive here in Toronto, a guy called Norm Patterson. And I knew that David Boyd had passed. I'd met David. He had come to Expiration 07 and given a talk along with a student of his, David Isles. Because in 1967, he had, was still with Hunting, and he gave a paper on using regional geophysical data for geological interpretation. 1967, and this was based on the 10 years previous that he worked with Hunting. And this is a time when, James might appreciate this, all the contouring was done by hand. There was no digital processing, no RTP, no voxels. That picture I had earlier this morning was kind of right at the tail end of that vintage, where the people, that was taken at PG&W's office, they're still based here in Toronto. And they actually had a group of drafters that did the contouring for them. And these people were pioneering the whole concept that you could extract geological information from magnetics, and this was back in the 50s. And Norm, I wanted to see if he could provide some background, and it was very interesting. He was down in Costa Rica, but he replied quickly, a little prickly, but quickly. And he said, well, David didn't really invent all this stuff. And it was interesting. Wasn't trying to actually assign credit for who invented it all. And he actually sent out this very detailed list, dating Norm Keeble Sr. was one, the people with the USGS, the beginnings of using aeromagnetic data for regional geological interpretation. And he knew David, of course, because I think he was actually training David at Hunting. And then Norm went on to establish his own business here in Toronto. But what David did is he went to university. And I got sent a list of all of his students, bachelors, masters, and PhDs. And those people, and the people they taught, basically injected that whole DNA, that whole genome, into Australia. Whereas in Canada, those guys all just stayed working for themselves. They made a decent living, but nobody actually, if you look around in the Canadian university institutions, nobody has taken that opportunity that was there 60 years ago. And basically, there's nothing there. And it just, to me, what was stunning was I look at the list of who's who in the Australian geophysical scene that were Prof. Boyd's students, as they called him affectionately. And that country would be far less advanced than without that one individual. And I come to Canada and I see that person never existed. It was like somehow, and I think I could tell Norm was a little, he wasn't taken back, but I think he appreciated that I didn't really care who invented it, but I really cared about who proselytized it, because that was the thing for the students, was to have somebody, very pleasant guy, he got along very well with the Indians, they did programs, continued to consult, but it was just, to me, it was like, boy, I sure wish, you know, and they've got somebody for exploration targeting up at Laurentian, and if you could have somebody that even had half of David Boyd's capabilities and interest, not just in the science, but in the students, because that was one of the things that he was so easy to get along with, and yet he was also technically extremely skilled. And you say his students have become, you know, the mainstay of the interpretation business. We just don't have that in Canada. You look around, there's a bunch of guys, well, I don't say chicken scratches, but it never really got to the point. And that's why this sort of meeting that we're having on Wednesday is interesting, because we've actually corralled probably, you know, if a bomb were to go off in that room, just, you know, we'd lose half the people in the world that had really excellent skill sets in that area. There's probably 20 or 30 that can do something. But it's so often, you know, when you talk, you know, you go say who can you can hire to do this, and they say, oh, Dave Isles and Lee Rankin, both Australians. Say, well, is that it? It's a pretty short list. They never mention anybody up here in North America. So, anyways, I just so we're going to do a round robin approach, and I guess we'll go 20 minutes. We figured
about 20
in
minutes each, yeah.
per topic.
Yeah.
Do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, what does industry need? Okay, I'm going to take a perspective from a junior sector because that's where I've been really involved. In my case, it's really junior and private, and obviously this goes back. We had discussions about this during the meeting of the TGI 5. One of the most fundamental challenges that I think we have in industry is uptake of innovation. Like, in other words, how do we get the fundamental learnings from TGI5 or GEMS or even Metal Earth? How do we get that to be uptaken so that in the junior sector, which spends a large amount of exploration dollars in Canada and even across the world, and how do we get the junior sector to actually internalize those learnings, those technologies, and be able to apply them to improve the exploration discovery rates? That's, for me, is one of the big challenges that we have. In the past, I mean, I came up through the ranks of major company, and in the company we had a lot of expertise. In Rwanda, we had people who were very knowledgeable about technical subjects, whether it be geophysics or geochemistry, or mining, or all kinds of other metallurgy, and we had access to that. But when you get into the junior sector, it's really reliant on often the VP of exploration really to be knowledgeable about all these things, and that's not easy.
So what's the question?
The question is, what does industry need? And
So
what
you
does...
need this with another question. That's okay.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
Well, I'll answer part of that. One of the things that was mentioned was about getting the service sector more involved.
Yeah.
And at one point,
We
because I
discussed
worked for
that,
BHP in my beady little mind, I thought BHP would serve its needs well if every piece of software that a practicing geophysicist was to use, if they paid to have them learn how to use it properly. Because their feedstock, what they don't explore themselves, is coming from companies that are drawing from that service industry. And we sell a couple of different pieces of software. Model Vision Pro is one of them. And I recognize how difficult it is for consultants, who are often individuals, living by the smell of the oily rag, as the Australians say. They are not going to spend the time, 2 or 3 weeks to learn a piece of software on their own bat, let alone buy it, unless they actually have a contract. And so to engage the service industry, it's I think, John, it's not just a matter of saying, oh, you've got a seat at the table. I used to have these almost knock-down, drag-em-out arguments with Kakuts about this, because I would say, Joe, what's the point of all this research being developed? And I know the companies aren't using it, and even when it should be commercialized, you're holding back because one guy from MIM said, no, I'm gonna be a very grumpy bugger and not let this stuff come out. And I'm saying, we don't even stand a chance. Why are we going to bother working with, trying to do a business development opportunity? So that's just one of the things from the service sector. I noticed you got Mira up there, and clearly, John's a smart enough guy. He's come through the experience with the Camaro, or the CEMIC footprints. He's not going to lose money on this. But he has more resources than most. And so saying you have a service, I know another group that sort of fell by the wayside in the footprints was Geosoft. And Geosoft is a far bigger organization, and they still couldn't figure out how to interface with this sort of academic government industry group that was spending all this money over 5 years. It was a very, I found, odd situation, but we need to, you know, we had a Venn diagram up there, and as somebody pointed out, the government part had a glancing blow to academia and industry. And I thought, you know, at one point then the next Venn diagram actually had all three lined up. I said, what if we tried to do this in BHP a little bit, so I'm sort of thinking I'm past, is take that circle of commonality and make that a group, at least from a point of view of a functioning activity that takes the interests of all three of those parties. Because to try and assign somebody within those three circles and say, oh, you're part of the overlap, and then, by the way, you've got another task that's going to take 20% of your time outside of your current activities, it's no effing way that anything's really going to happen. So unless you can assign people to something for a period of time, so call it a secondment, and get them involved in a visceral level with that activity, I think it's going to be very difficult. And you know, I'm a director of the Footprints thing, and I look at the difficulties that the number of the companies who are sponsoring it are having with the whole, what are we getting back? And in part, it just seems to be a door that's only going one way. You know, information's, go ahead.
Can I point out that for universities, though, we still have to purchase some of those software very often to teach with them. And so
No, you get an academic discount, man, I'm sure.
Well, no, but there's actually, but when we have 5 or 6 packages to buy at $5,000 a piece every year, it's $30,000 worth of software. So we don't actually teach on those software, mostly because I think people are afraid that we're going to consult with them. We don't have time to consult with them. Well, not me anyway. And so if you want students to be trained in those software, they learn them quite quickly. Right? We can actually teach them, but we can't actually pay $30,000 a year. So it's something that the software industry has to look into, probably so that when they become consultants, they can be more active.
Well, I would say I wouldn't put it on the backs of the software companies. Not that I feel overly sorry for them. I would put it on the people that would be the employers of those students. That to say, part of if you're putting a grant or put something in front of them and say, well, I mean, I say classic case. When I went through UBC, all we had was shit. We had equipment that nobody wanted to use. It was dropped off in usually in disarray. And this was the stuff we were supposed to learn how to do modern geophysical surveys with. If I hadn't been able to go up during the summer, I never would have learned my craft, right? The stuff that even the TAs laughed at the stuff that we had. So I think all the companies recognize that at some point, whether they hire those people 5 years down the road or 10 years down, or they get the work that they're doing and are making expensive business judgments on, to have a knowledgeable cadre of people that can do modern processing is somehow to the benefit. And the cost, most of these companies have got corporate licenses, for Pete's sake. They could negotiate a deal, they could probably get another, for every corporate license, they could probably get a third of an academic one at no cost. They just have to think the thing through a little bit. And I think you could have the kit that you need to help your students train on the
Yeah, I mean,
state-of-the-art.
there's no doubt that the software companies have a big vested interest in having students being exposed to their software at the university level.
I mean, it's worked. I work for MATLAB for quality.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
MATLAB is more expensive, so we're switching to Python. All the codes that are being made in a lot of the labs right now are all Python-based because it's free software.
Yeah.
And we can actually, when they go and consult for juniors, they can use Python.
Yeah.
They can't bring MATLAB to the wood.
But MATLAB has a whole interface, Python does.
No, it hasn't a full interface.
So is there any perspective on this question from the major mining firms?
As an ex-major mining firm.
Yeah, right.
As an ex-major mining firm, I think the comment I made earlier about changing the strategy of how they do exploration, rethinking exactly what they do when they hit the ground, rethinking. And the problem at the moment is that, one of the main problems is that companies hit the ground regardless of the trading environment and essentially following a recipe. They do exactly the same thing. They go out and do the soil sampling, they go out and do some geophysics, and then they pick the large red dots with the large red dots at the top of them, and those are now the drill targets. And there's no great deal of thought goes into whether in fact what they were doing in the first instance was a valid path to actually follow.
Why would you say that's the case? Because there's just
I'd challenge that.
poor management of risk?
Having come from another major company, and
No,
you challenge it as well.
No, I mean, I would say, what he said though, I mean, if I go back to the Naranda days, like back in the 90s, what he's saying is true. I'm not sure that it was equally true of Naranda in the 2000s, but it certainly was true in the 90s.
It goes back to the comment that was made earlier on by, that not every company is the same.
Yeah.
Not every company is the same. And I think sometimes the major companies, the juniors are the worst, and often the middle tier companies are the ones who are actually thinking about what they're doing. The major companies get lost in their rut, and people are doing the job rather than exploration, whereas the junior companies are doing prospecting and perhaps thinking a little bit more about what they're doing on the ground.
Well, one of the problems with the big companies is they can't find anything that's economic, right? It's like, the big problem is they're forced into looking for the tail end of the distribution, and it's very difficult, except in the brownfields environment. When they're in the brownfields, obviously incremental addition to the resource base is very valuable because they're integrated vertically, and the cost of developing things is modest. But in a greenfields environment, the big companies are, I mean, I'm surprised to see, companies like Rio Tinto and even Capital being able to do greenfields exploration. And Rio Tinto have been successful at it, and so it's what it means is that it's possible, right? I mean, it's possible to do it, but yeah, you need to have a good culture. And
so from an industry bigger company perspective, I'd say that the industry needs to lower technical risk. At the moment, technical risk in greenfields exploration is too high in certain terrains overlay. But it needs, especially in covered terrains, it needs a way of reducing technical risk. And what I mean by that, well, it needs to know how deep to cover it. You can't do that. Let's find out how a good way should at least find out how deep to cover it. We should be able to get that sort of right. And then we need to know if we are going to go out, feel comfortable risk-wise to start collecting samples or drilling holes. We want to know what it means and what do distal footprints really look like. People have got an idea of what distal footprints look like, but nobody knows.
So I'm glad you said that, because you disagree with what I said, but in fact you just re-agreed with what I said, which is that companies go out and they do exploration in covered areas with zero idea of what the cover is, with zero attempt to even
That's what they don't do.
define what the
That's what
cover
they
is.
don't do.
So we need to change that strategy to understand those things.
the comment was made that we need to lower technical risk. Is there, when you say we need to lower technical risk, are you talking in a qualitative sense, or do you think quantitatively there's ways, like in other words, there's metrics that we can use to track that?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
So is this the role that you'd see largely for loosely called pre-competitive data? Because it would seem to be more kind of Mike's job to go out and measure large-scale terrain, overburden thickness.
You did mention something about the risk related to environment, right?
Because if you, as an individual company, I'm
Risk
just putting
mapping.
you in that position of
Environmental
being
risk
a
mapping.
mid-tier exploration manager, you may be looking at part of, Eastern Australia, but in Queensland, but you're not going to go out and spend 2 years mapping overburden thickness.
No, that should be, in a way, that should be, you should be able to do that. It should be pre-competitive. And that's the role of, it's probably the role of the surveys. But if they do it right now, they can't do it.
Right. But if there's not, the thing is, the service industry could do it because it's a no-brainer. You could take a decent magnetic data and a first pass, James's caveats about remnants. You'd have enough points that are probably still reduced magnetism to get some idea of
It's a shame there's nobody from GA here, because they would say you can't. Because they've been trying to do it.
Well, you get numbers. The thing is, maybe you have to do a Craig and take out the stuff that's dodgy. And how much do you need from the point of view of characterizing a terrain? You know, do you need a point? People are living with gravity that's every, was it 8 kilometers? And if you had overburden thickness to maybe, you know, that because mag data is pretty high density.
So one of the things that came back.
Plus or minus 25%.
Yeah.
I mean, if you knew the overburden thickness, the 25% every 2 kilometers, but that suffices for initial strategies.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think, you know, from the questions that are being asked in government are around not only trying to move beyond just fostering discovery. I mean, it came up today, Andrew mentioned it, you know, the job is actually to turn discoveries into minds, to find discoveries that will become minds. And, you know, in light of the first question, you know, that's more the fundamental question of where would you put your highest priority? Where would the spending be best done, whether it's by the companies or by the government, to provide, to orient towards finding discoveries that become minds, not just finding new discoveries.
Right.
What I would answer to that, it depends on how you perceive it, because you see the problem is that one of the problems with making discoveries is if you make a discovery in an area that has no infrastructure, the odds that that's going to be economic is going to be. But if a road gets built, that's one of the things that's interesting about like the Plan R that they have in Quebec is that as the integral part of that plan is the building of a road. Okay, so what the road does is it makes a certain number of projects economic, and but it opens up the whole area for exploration, and becomes because then your threshold target becomes manageable in terms of the probability of discovery at the belt scale, right? Whereas prior to that infrastructure, the odds of getting something economic was just out of reach. So it's this interplay between the micro, okay, the micro issue, which is an individual investment that someone makes, versus the macro, the broad policy scale, which is really the level that you work with at the survey. Right?
So it's, you know, and that's exactly what I was thinking about. So is it better off the government takes its money and builds a road to somebody that says,
that's a very good question.
To hell with the GSC.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a very good question.
Provide less bang for buck than us driving the road in here, or
Well, if you were to do your prospectivity maps in a general sense.
But it's a good question.
And then take those prospectivity maps and give it to the government and say, these are the areas that roads should go in based on the priorities and likelihood of there being significant deposits. We're not guaranteeing there's going to be a mine found in 3 years' time or 5 years' time. But this to our, you know, the science that we can afford with the budgets you give us, these are the areas that have the greatest likelihood. And of course with it comes the opportunity to have the dialogues with all the people that actually live in these communities, and, you know, get them involved in the planning for the future, as opposed to trying to say after a deposit's found and then, you know, say roughshod over the, what we'll call it, they field roughshod, saying now, well, we got a deposit, we have to develop this, and you guys have to get, you know, toe the line somehow.
No, I agree. And, you know, PDAC's just released a report on the infrastructure piece and prioritizing where.
No, I mean,
that's as good as any.
That's right. That's right. And so infrastructure, I mean, Jean-Marc with Azimut, they do a lot of exploration in the far north. And the biggest impediment in terms of the model is the infrastructure, because they're typically far from coast. The best areas they have are far from coast, and if it's a gold or diamond, okay, it's flying. You can fly the stuff out. But if you're producing a concentrate, you know, getting it to the coast is going to be a major problem.
Can I ask what's going to be the return of investment if there is no mine there on the building of the road versus like investing in R&D so that we can.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a trade-off. No, I agree, but the thing is.
Better off finding something and
Yeah.
then building the road.
Well, I mean, in Canada, and I didn't bring it up before, but I think about it because of where I live, there's a sovereignty issue. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And you've got a very thin population, you know, sitting along with all within 100 kilometers of the border, except Saskatoon. And, you know, there's ships with foreign flags basically going through the Arctic that aren't really being monitored. I mean, it's not a good situation. At some point, there's going to have to be an issue of natural resource development and basically establishment of some sort of sovereign presence. And roads are a good start. You can drive a whole bunch of shit down the road. That's why they built one up to Alaska during the war.
Yeah.
A strategic value into a remote
There
area.
was a strategic value into a remote
And
area.
it's the lifeline of the entire frickin' state, basically, if you didn't have 747s. Is that Alaskan highway?
Yeah.
So, anyways. And just on that depth thing, we bought the Naudi software from CGG, BHP. We had a stitch of Australia in 1993, and we generated basically an overburden thickness map, or depth to magnetic basement, on a weekend. It was like we were taking pictures of Mars before anybody else did. And I remember seeing that image circulating around inside BHP. So for GA to say you can't do it on that, it was done 35 years ago. Of course, the thing is, it wasn't down to 200-meter resolution.
So, some comments, Dave?
Well, yeah, I just want to follow up on
Yeah.
the
And then,
comment about
Jean-Marc after.
strategy, exploration strategy, that we need a different one or a better one. I'm not quite sure why you think our current strategy.
No, I don't
or
think we
the
need a different one or a
steps that-
better one. I'm saying that individual companies, when they go out and do exploration, a lot of them do exactly the same thing they've been doing for the last 30 years. They aren't changing how they're doing their exploration in the ground. They're not bringing in new technology, new innovation. They're going out and doing the same soil samples they always did. They're going out and using the same geophysical methods, and they're not thinking about whether what they're doing is in fact even valid for what they're trying to explore. The juniors are a prime example of that. The amount of samples, the amount of money they blow on doing things like MMI surveys over huge areas, and they'll send it off to a consultant like myself or Dave and say, can you tell us what's there? There was no thought process went in beforehand to say whether what they were doing was even a valid thing to do in the first place.
Okay, now, what I would challenge there, and it comes back to Dan's comment earlier, we often hear these blanket statements, and that's what I don't agree with. And we're just a mid-tier company when it comes to our market cap, but everything I'm hearing here, we do it. We do magnetic conversions of basins around the world. We get that first pass estimate. Are we dealing with 1 kilometer? Are we dealing with 2 kilometers? Is it out of our exploration range? We do those things. I know junior companies who I would put at the top tier of being innovative. They don't have a lot of money. They might only have a few properties. They don't have a lot of money. They are creative, a lot of them. There are quality juniors out there.
No, there are.
Pushing the envelope on techniques and technologies. Any major company, and again, we're a mid-size, and we're experimenting with new geophysical techniques all the time. I'd be surprised if the majors weren't doing that as well. So I challenge it to say the industry's still just doing a lot of the same stuff they've always done. We no longer put a budget together at the beginning of the budget cycle and say, we're going to drill X number of holes, that's all, and that's what we're going to stick to. I would challenge and say junior companies and major companies change their tactics on the fly because the technology's there. That one gentleman who showed the physical property test that they do, showed 8 of them. We do 5 of them regularly. Every project will do 5 of those every season. So, and I'd be shocked if the majors weren't doing similar things. And that allows us to make decisions on the fly. So I would say we're not exploring
I
like
would
we
say
used
if
to.
you change companies, you'd be in for a surprise. I worked for a company only 3 years ago, drilled 7 holes into the halo around the bullseye porphyry on the basis of geophysics. The worst thing anybody could ever do. That was known years ago that you drill in the centre, not in the blooming halo.
Yeah,
They drill in the halo.
I would say, okay, then there's
Because
going to be
they're
lots of
doing geophysics
anecdotal examples of that. And that's all I'm challenging here is these
No,
blanket
the
statements.
point, I get your point. The point though, but that raises a question of what is the reality in terms of the how can I say, in terms of the implication of these microeconomic decisions, and how does that play out at the macro level? Because ultimately, when we're looking at the total amount of invested, that's macro, okay? You know, $12 billion, whatever, that's a macro. And in that macro number, there's a lot of different entities, a lot of different agents that are, and what would be interesting to know is that out of that macro number, how much of it is repetitive and how much of it is actually innovative.
Yeah, and that's all I'm.
Yeah, that's a study that could be done. That could be done.
We're actually agreeing. I have no problem that there are companies out there who do things properly.
Drama?
Yeah, you know, the question you asked, what do we need? Certainly we need data, quality data, regional data. For example, lake bottom sediment data are extremely useful to define regional scale footprints for unknown, unrecognized potential mineral districts. For example, in Quebec, over the past 15 years, we worked extensively over the lake bottom sediment database, which consists into 400,000 samples, which have been collected over a 50-year period, and which covers Quebec. You know, on the same case, it covers as well Labrador and, you know, a part of Newfoundland. And this is an extremely useful database to recognize footprints of potential mineral districts. Again, collection of you know, of the exploration files and make them accessible to the industry is also critical, you know, to have this the past exploration files accessible, organized, cheap, easily accessible through internet. It's absolutely critical and to be able to do digital processing and integrate this past exploration work with a regional scale database. It's critical for us. I would say this is a competitive advantage for a province, for a region, to make this database accessible, and they can attract exploration dollars if the database is structured to facilitate the access for explorers. Again, in Quebec, what we are doing, there is about 6,000 prospects on uneconomic deposit on mines known in the files. Everything is accessible. It's very, very easy to get the data and to work with already known mineral deposits and to extract value and link these deposits to the regional data, geophysical data, geochemical data, and it's a way to position yourself as a competitive region and attract exploration dollars.
Okay. I'd say that I go back to Matthew's boxes, Peter, and this is just this sort of the evolution of different companies' approach things. Some are doing quite effective work. Others are not doing as effective work, and to me, it's to their investors and shareholders to decide who they support. Now, as an internal person, a geoscientist in one of these ships, it can be frustrating, I think, to see those inefficiencies, because you can see the guys on the other 12-meter boat, you know, sailing past you, and you think, I've got a boat that's just as good or better, and yet I'm seen be calmed, right? And I think this is just the nature of capitalism and competition. And it's not a bad thing.
There's some questions.
We're going to run out of time.
We've got to move out of time. We got to move on. Just a quick one.
Just a quick one. I don't want to deny the importance of technology. Like leapfrog, geophysical tool and versions, but I come back to, our example, we hire an entry-level geologist out of, say, U of S or U of Regina, we put them on a drill program, they're going a conductor, they haven't really learned geology, and this isn't a simple solution. I think Craig Hart pointed out the collapse of the surveys, so there's fewer economic geology profs at universities now, there's fewer students getting jobs with geological surveys where they get mapping experience. They come out into companies, you get a few people like Dave trying to train them, so that's this whole business of, we can roll out new technology, better technology, but the person that's sitting in the driver's seat hasn't built that experience level to visualize.
Well, again, it's uptake.
Can I just speak to that? Because I think it really is a misconception that we're doing less with students. I mean, that seems to be the paradigm that's believed. But in TGI, there was 136 students, 85 were at master's level or above that came out of that program alone. GEM is probably well over 200 students for its program. I mean, you're looking at 350, 400 students coming out of those programs alone. And it's a question of, where do they all go? And is that, I understand the industry would like to have the pick and choose the best and the cream of the crop and all that, then, that's great. But as a government, if we're just churning out more students to give you guys the ability to get a better cream of the crop, and the rest, well, too bad for you guys. Probably not.
But I think what Dan's also
Yeah,
saying,
no,
I know you want to move on,
Yeah.
but universities, if you did a survey of all the geology departments, geoscience, earth science departments, there's very few that actually teach an or geology or systems class anymore. That's no longer. That was a core class when I was an undergraduate. That doesn't exist. So when they come into our company, we have to get them to think like an economic or an exploration geologist. And they have no idea what alteration is because they're not even talking.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. What do we need, Ken?
Yeah.
What do we need from our strategic partners?
This is
Who is we? Who is
the
we?
mining industry.
The mining industry. And who's the strategic partners?
Who we choose.
I mean, are you talking about government? Are you talking about service industry?
That's
Are you talking about?
we go back to the Venn diagram.
About partners?
Who do we have?
I would say that universities have to be part of your solution because we're feeding new people into the system.
Yeah. I agree. I would say certainly from the junior sector perspective, it's clear that what we need from our strategic partners is whether it be the service industry, we need technology, we need knowledge, operational knowledge that is lacking in the company. We need from our partners, from our business partners on projects. We need especially big companies. We need expertise that they can, multidisciplinary expertise that they can bring, particularly on advanced projects where you're going into resource definition and eventually PDAs, pre-feasibility and feasibility studies. A lot of juniors, they do some things like that, but they basically, for all purposes, just all farmed out. It's all farmed out to engineering firms, and the results can be mixed at best. When you don't have the knowledge, the key knowledge in-house to deal with very complex information that comes like from a pre-feasibility study, it's always dangerous. It's always dangerous. From the majors, the perspective obviously is different. Any comments on that?
Well, I guess still some Dave's on it. I was saying, I think one of our experiences with external research partners is those that we have a long enough relationship with or that have been committed to an area of research that they've built up an expertise. So our geophysicists, for years we've supported UBC, GIF, and that. Our geophysicists, Dave and I, live huge value there, all the immersion teams. back when Chemical was looking at things more internationally, global basins, that for years we did research with Kurt Kaiser's group out of Queens and fluids and basins, isotopes and such. Didn't really help us spot a hole, but it helped us maybe put some thought to how to evaluate basins. Those were both, you know, sort of symbiotic, or examples of symbiotic productive relationships. Get to the model now like CIMIC that we had high hopes for, and what we have is a lot of new researchers coming to the table, and there's been some bright lights come out of that study for us. Steve Piercy's student on lithogeochemistry and such, but for the most part, what we're seeing is, and this isn't just a chemical thing, it's the uranium companies now, Basel saying we're essentially teaching the researchers what we've known for some time. We're not partnering with external organizations that already have an expertise that they can bring to the table, like say UBC GIF can in the conversion world. So that's one thing we need, is we need partners that can bring something to the table to help us, basically.
The long-term relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
I find that as well, definitely working as a researcher, like really building up a rapport with the industry people that we're working with that's the main.
More
way.
quid pro quo.
Yeah.
Yeah, we learn from each other.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, I get it. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. If you have these alliances with people, and in the end you're teaching them, what are you getting out of it, right?
If you send a new researcher into Cloncurry, they've got 10 years before they even vaguely understand what's going on.
So Dan, how are you on the issue of, you know, sitting in the service sector? You know, most of the time I feel like an Uber driver. You're basically there, Uber. You're there, you know, you're competing against yellow cabs. People want the cheapest price. I mean, having a special relationship is great as long as we're in your room for a month or your offices. But, you know, if we're constrained and you say, well, we're developing proprietary knowledge here and you're going to have to quarantine that, for us it's very difficult to see, I mean, I'm just speaking my own pointed hat on.
Yeah.
Generating something that which may be of value to you and not basically offering it to anybody else, because for us it's often an opportunity cost just to, you know, I say apologize, but interact with people on a special level. We make far more money if we just make hot dogs and sell them on the street corner. Going in and doing something special, nobody will ever pay, and I know what, you know, large companies' overheads are. They'll never pay us really what we're worth if we were inside that organization. You know, we are basically being asked to do something for the normal rates that is allowing you to do something very special. And inside BHP, historically, they said, well, you know, you guys don't get a bonus or everything. We give you a job and you fail most of the time. You know, I think, well, yeah, but we're the future of your freaking company if you really wanted to look at it. So, is that an issue that you've come to grips with in terms of, you know, working with outside groups that basically have to play the field, even though they swear allegiance to you at the time they're working on your problem? I'm curious as to, for it to work. Academics, it's a different thing.
Yeah.
Theses are held back for years before they're released by a consultant.
No, I would disagree with that, Ken.
Well, the theses are held back, I know, because we're talking about this in the CMIC,
Yeah.
with footprints. Information is not coming out on a as generated basis.
Yeah, not in terms of years are not held back. There are timelines, and a reasonable timeline for us would be 12 to 24 months. And then we would let that student and academic to move that stuff up. That's what we would look for. If you're asking for a relationship with a service company, I'd say, yeah, at least from our perspective, we wouldn't handicap you to say, let's work something out here. Let's look at this problem, let's develop something. We're not going to say that you can't use that in the future. But there would be some constraints. You know? It might be maybe a 3 or 4 year period of confidentiality that we want to retain for a while. Yeah. And I don't know if that would work for you. It would be negotiable, but at least in our environment now, we wouldn't approach a service company and say, we're going to tie your hands forever on this one.
Depends on the type of project. We've run into problems, particularly working with pre-competitive data, because we can do the same thing for the next company as we did for you, for instance. And the thing is, we're not getting software from you. Our intellectual property is ours. Intellectual capital is ours. But a company sees the same product in their competitor's booth or something, and they come after us with pitchforks and say, "You didn't give us any data. We're using all of our own knowledge." So we are bouncing into this issue, and probably is more pre-competitive data.
I
set.
appreciate that, yes, I do, but if it was us giving you our data.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that'd be
that's different.
We would.
I understand.
tie
That's
up
right.
for a short
You got a
period.
non-disclosure agreement, and the rest of it that locks it down.
Yeah.
So one of the things in the service industry, I think is very important, because that's a big change in the way exploration is now carried out. It's less in-house for all things, and it's more contracting
Yeah,
to
that's right.
specializations. And I think, in looking at this from the GSC or governmental standpoint, we start to question whether maybe we should put some resources into providing direct support to make the service industry more competitive, more efficient, effective in what they do. We did a little bit of this in TGI4. We can look at the gravity surveys that we did with the Falcon system and the Ring of Fire, the Nechalacho region. We started Nechalacho, we then took the learnings from that, improved it for Ring of Fire, went off to Strange Lake, which was a challenge, but purposefully so that we could test out limits of our own internal way of doing this to feed back into industry. And we traditionally orient our programs towards the exploration manager. And we hope the exploration manager then, engages with service companies to ask for the things that will flow out of the knowledge that's generated by our programs of pertinence to exploration manager. And I liken it a bit to a building, putting up a building. We tend to engage with the foreman. We don't tend to engage with the carpenters and the electricians and the bricklayers as much. But there's nothing to say that we couldn't be providing our knowledge, our science that would be specifically oriented towards making those groups, geophysicists, geochemists, 3D modelers, remote sensing.
Yeah, and I mean, in some of these projects,
efficient, effective, so that the Canadian side of this is actually generated, and that actually provides an economic output. It's true innovation, because then they turn around and sell this. In the old days, X-Tech days, we do the development and then sort of put it out there.
Yeah.
But I think there's not much benefit for us doing technological development when the service companies are the ones that actually are the ones that can generate it far better and provide that better output. So there's perhaps another way of looking at it. I'm not.
So I mean, some of these research programs like Metal Earth have a component that's working with service industry that are providing services in kind as part of the budget.
Yeah.
And I think
Myra,
there's
for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's opportunity there certainly. And I don't know within TGI5 if there was any
We'd
component.
be talking TGI6.
TGI6, okay. But in the previous TGIs, there were no component of that nature in these.
There was, but only but as support for
Okay.
the ore system research.
Okay.
Those type of agreements sound good in principle, but can be an absolute nightmare. On the Summit program, certain service companies are brought in as partners, and so we was getting in-kind techniques from them. But if we want to use our other techniques, we're banned from using them by the NSEC agreement. We're not allowed to spend money with those companies.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I see.
So it can be really, really difficult.
How did it work out with Camiro, Tom? Tom?
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Tom.
Wake up.
It's okay. It's okay. How did it work out with Camiro? There were some service companies that were providing in-kind contributions to Camiro research, if you recall.
What specifically?
Well, in geochemical analysis.
Yeah, well, in the geochemistry, the service companies did inclined analyses.
Yeah. Okay.
And then their experts. I know Eric Hoffman was quite involved in all
Yeah.
the meetings.
Yeah.
But people from the other companies.
Okay, okay.
But
But were there
And then-
any new technique, like, if I recall, when we did the geochem, the soil geochemistry, there were some techniques that were developed. Interpretive techniques or, I mean, the analytical techniques, no. I mean, MMI was already established, enzyme leach was always established. But there was some testing that was done with various different methods, if I recall.
yeah, the idea was that people were using a variety of methods,
Okay.
and some of them were known, others were black box methods.
Okay.
And I think the ones that were known were a bit more useful.
Okay.
And the same thing works in geophysics. I mean, we had projects with Mirror Geoscience,
Okay.
and each company would bring in, we had the geophysicists from about 10 different companies,
Okay.
and then the companies would provide a data set, and then they would do all the in-house work building the models on detection, relative detection and so
Okay.
forth.
Okay.
So that worked quite well.
Okay. So that kind of.
That's really important.
Kind of, yeah, it kind of
Those
fit.
kind of
Yeah, there were some,
relationships, yeah.
and there were some techniques.
Because you can't really do anything without somebody providing a solid
Yeah,
data set, yeah.
yeah, okay. And I recall also the quadrupole ICP-MS was originally invented at NRCan, correct?
Yeah, so I think, if you look at trace element or analysis as an example, we were at the forefront of developing that, and it kind of oozed out into the geochem industry, like ACLabs and that, by us sharing our knowledge with them, by us also asking them to provide analyses that adhered to our protocols and standards. and
Okay.
which they then in turn turned around to industry and academics and went, oh, by the way, this is what the GSC uses. We can offer that to you.
Right,
And
right.
So
So
that's
that's
kind of
an
the
example,
idea,
yeah, that's an example and I think that's also very important because often the service industry, they don't have the resources to capitalize that kind of research. But they certainly have the capability of learning it and mastering these technologies. So that's I think is very important. There was a question?
Well, it was mostly a comment, but I think Robbie will be able to comment a little bit on the DCRC experiment in terms of commercialization. Because I think having universities work with service providers, it actually gives a good balance of, universities are not very good at commercializing things.
No.
And so if you actually have a service provider that can actually take it and then do something with it, it has more value.
Yeah.
And so in terms of like small projects that you want to investigate, and it's medium-term kind of things, and you don't think that as a private company you can invest the money or the time, it's a good space for university students because we can spend the time. It's going to take us a long time to get there, but we'll get there. And so it's a matter of looking. It's kind of strange because when you look in Australia, sometimes there's some universities that run basically exploration departments. Like Curtin was one of them. We run seismic out of Curtin. And then you look at service providers that want to be researchers. We have to actually do what we do best,
Yeah.
and then partner together to actually get.
But how is it easy to get the IP out of institutions like the university or like NRCan?
You just write agreements at the start.
So it can be
Yeah.
done from straight?
It's easy to negotiate IP that doesn't exist yet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
It's when it exists that it's.
right. Oh, yeah, okay.
We need to move to the next one.
Yep. Any last comments on this? No? Okay. Okay, the second one, data integration. That's something that I have very strong views on also. I'm sure Jean-Marc also. The key, a lot of data sets are available. In many cases, they're available for free. And it's extremely important. What I found personally in many jurisdictions, less now in Canada, but historically, is there was lots of data you could get for almost free. But as soon as you mentioned the word geophysics, everything changed. It was like now it's like you're paying a significant fraction of the original cost of the survey to get the data, right? I mean, it's maybe it's okay for large corporations, but certainly small, very small, you know, a small outfit. I work in many cases out of my basement generating exploration targets. So obviously I don't have $100,000 budget to buy geophysical data. You know, I mean, it's just a.
Where did it cost you to buy, what jurisdictions?
Oh, places like Brazil, or you go to historically, and even in Quebec was quite expensive to buy airborne
It's always
geophysical
been
data.
free in Ontario.
Yeah, I know.
We were free as well.
Yeah, I know.
And honestly, we're free because it provides a competitive advantage to Canada over Brazil, over, you know, I'm more than happy that Brazil's charging actually.
That's right.
I'd throw
But I
across
can get geochemical data from Brazil from anywhere for free.
the
Geology data, free, but geophysical data, it's expensive.
for you.
Yeah.
Data integration to me is like a comment that was made about innovation. It's the hackneyed expression. And what I see so much of is that people will say, once they've got geology, geophysics, geochemistry, LiDAR into a platform, that's integration.
No,
It's not integration.
Not quite, no.
It's not integration. And yet, not enough people will then step up and say, I don't care whether it's a bunch of 4 scruffy maps on a table or something, you know, inside a whiz-bang GoCAD model. Until somebody sits down and starts thinking about those as an integrated Earth model, integration hasn't taken place.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a call, and I don't think it was just, don't know the name, but it involved the current program beginning with F that's wrapping up, right? And apparently, one of the guys who was in charge of integration for that, in a phone call after the roundup, it was like this plea at the end of the phone. He says, "What does integration mean? Nobody's told me." This was the guy in charge of it. So you think you got problems, right? I mean, it's just, and because some of the groups, I mean, just, you know, they're in love with their technology, they'll put it all in there, and then it's like they walk away. And it's like, it's your job now.
Well, that was like a classical example of poor definition. Everybody kept writing the word down, or the 2 words down, data integration, but nobody ever defined what that data integration was going to be. And so now, in the large project beginning with F, that you mentioned, that's probably going to be the greatest failure of the whole exercise, is the data integration.
Well, and you know, James's talk about the MAG studies in Queensland show it's a rocky road. It's difficult when you have a lot of things going on geologically that we only partially understand. I mean, I loved your talk because I gave a very, very small piece on some remnants at a porphyry in BC a couple of weeks ago. And a geophysicist came up with a major company who had a representative here, and he says, I don't believe that the remnants is there. And it's like, you know, God's green earth, man, you know, we kind of know we can recognize these things. And he says, no, I don't believe it's there. And yet it's alive and well, and for me, there's been efforts on the software side to basically expunge remnants from data, like it's bad. We've got to get rid of these blue areas because they're confusing geologists.
It's too hard to ask.
And I tell people, it's a goddamn timestamp, for Christ's sake. It's a different event than the positive one.
That's right.
Pay attention to it. I've seen a number of deposits in Mexico. All the major mineralization sits around remnant bodies. You know, go figure. It's a time. Embrace it. It may be a bitch to sort out, but at the end of the day, that's what integration to me is about in that little space. But a lot of people, no, let's just massage it to an analytic signal or Voxy and get rid of it.
I think the problem is actually further than that, which is that not everybody agrees on what is data. And so then after that, they actually try to design data structures to fit data that they don't actually know how to relate to each other. And they go into an infinite loop.
Yeah.
And
I do, yeah.
And that's when the data quality becomes a real issue. You know, things like predictive modeling and things like that. You know, it's actually the quality of the data that goes in that controls the model, and basically where the data is that controls the model. So the biggest issue with data integration, I think I pretty much said it before, is the quality of your data and the quality of your constraints. But most of the processing and the interpretation we can do, I think. You know, it's just shit goes in, shit comes out. Yeah.
So, sorry, I was just gonna say, like, one of the things that you need to consider is exactly that, what's data? And in our parlance within the GSC, we're starting to coalesce around the idea that data is essentially those measurements or values or observations around which you don't add and you don't add individual interpretation to the point. So it's processed the same way. It may be observational data, but it's all biased the same way by the geologists. Data, I think, is additive. There's no, whether it's good or bad or otherwise, it never disappears. It's always there, and it's the interpretation that determines whether it's usable or not usable or how it's usable. And the interpretation part is actually competitive. Everyone competes for what they think is the best interpretation of the data. And so your data, in essence, is the marketplace for your competition of
interpretation is the
interpretation is the marketplace that feeds.
No, I agree
from
with
the
that. I
data.
agree with that.
And so you really need to look at, collecting data is fine, but you need to know what you're going to do with it. And you can have high quality data and misinterpret it. A good example is in geochronology. The first time we started putting points on a map, we had a dike running through a Precambrian terrain, a Proterozoic dike in a Precambrian terrain, high quality ages that were literally, maybe 20 meters from each other. And so what did the person putting it on the map do? They started contouring all the ages. and so, which is a valid interpretation, but it's completely wrong. So,
I mean, one of the points back to what I said was that we're substituting the models for interpretation, and I think that's a thing that's rubbing off on a younger generation, is that they're confusing all these elegant models we're able to produce and saying, well, that's integration. And we load those up in whatever platform of choice you have, and we've done our task. But it's not explaining it geologically, and I think it's this absence of people now that they're able to rub up against, the mentors, and not just the mentors about how to drill holes and do samples and keep the analytical labs honest and the rest of it, but to sit down and actually try and draw out geology from these images that otherwise wouldn't exist. It's the creative process that really, to me, drives successful exploration. It's not just a Venn diagram of this, 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 and this. That's how I started the business, right? We had an exploration manager that wanted geophysical input, geochemical input, and a geological input. You literally slid them under his door, and then he decided what to pursue. Now, he might have been a genius, right? He actually was a pretty good exploration geologist. But he didn't share that knowledge with us. We just did our task, like good troopers. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one other thing. I mean, if we really want to get to true data integration, I think the interpretation has to just be ripped out of that completely. I think we really need to get to a point where we have really high resolution data, and we have data that is spatially consistent throughout a whole area.
Yeah. I mean, that's like...
Because what we need to get to is basically a more or less a voxel model where we can basically use our high resolution data to constrain every voxel in that model, and there's no interpretation whatsoever.
But what about issues of alteration, overprinting, and secondary processes that basically take your primary rock and remove its characteristics, which we're relying on as fingerprints, and turn it into something that looks like something else? I mean, I would defy that unless you started doing 3D seismic as well as a whole bunch of other things.
Maybe you do need to do that.
Well, I mean, remember what we're sort of leaning it towards exploration, where we do have to move on and budgets.
It's a different scale.
And time. Yeah,
but it's a different scale, right? I mean, it's like, if you take the type of stuff that Jean-Marc does with Azimuth, I mean, he's trying to identify mineral districts, okay? I mean, the value of seismic for him is to have a better understanding of how fluids move through the crust, okay, at the mega scale. Like how does a gold-bearing fluid go from the subcontinental lithospheric mantle And how does that move up into the, that's where obviously seismic can be extremely important because they can identify the likely pathways for fluids. And when you put that in relation to the stuff that you see on surface, then it can really hint to a lot of things going on. But beyond that, it's not going to be all that useful.
I'd say that data integration needs to be fluid throughout the entire process, and that's what we're missing usually. So the data that we get at exploration, we don't actually use afterwards very often. Very often it's just like put aside because people don't know what to do with it. And it makes me laugh a little bit because we're talking about voxels, but I work with a lot of geologists and they look at a lot of thin sections. They're thin sections. You can take 200 of their thin sections and you can't put it in the voxel. So again, it's a data problem, right? It's a data scale problem.
Yeah.
They'd argue until they're blue in the face that that's data.
Yeah. Well, I mean, same thing with geometallurgy. They're using blue collar sections. But the advantage is that they take them throughout the whole deposit instead of having to take a 50-ton bulk sample and sending that bulk sample to do a detailed treatment in a lab where you're going to get really high resolution information on that sample, but it's not really going to tell you a lot about what the rest of the deposit is happening, right? So it's like the scale of the data. John?
I'm
Sorry.
curious, what
He could be there.
Yeah.
what people think here about using machine language and artificial intelligence for helping with interpretation of integrated data sets.
I think it goes back to the issue of junk data. If you have good
Yeah,
data.
okay, well, you know, the thing is,
Yeah.
right now, we just had
Yeah.
a really long conversation with
Yeah.
IBM and Cisco.
Yeah, no, with Watson.
With
Yeah.
Watson.
There's some really
and-
interesting
and,
stuff
you
going
know,
on.
the guy we
Yeah.
were bringing in as a partner is Myra and John McGahey,
Yeah.
so we were happy
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah.
So we brought him to the meeting
Yeah. Yeah.
as a teleconference.
That's right.
You know, I'm not sure if they'd add any value. They're really hot to get into
I
mining.
mean, I've looked at some images and using artificial intelligence, they look at a photograph, okay, and it can tell you basically when it was photographed. But just by looking at the photograph, they can say this was taken in 1972, okay, and without having any dates indicate. Just by looking at the photograph, they look at pixels. The artificial intelligence can actually, from the way that people are dressed, from their hair, from like it can do all that, right? It can do all that, and it's surprisingly accurate. It's just like translations. Google Translate goes from English to French, and now they're doing really, really well. And it doesn't use any rules of grammar.
So,
to do it.
what are you saying then? You're saying
What I'm
there's
saying is
value
yes.
to that?
I think there's
Like you see
I
what
think
Watson
it's
is
the
doing in
future.
medicine
I think it's
and
the
other
future.
things.
I think
there
it's the
might be
future.
value.
Yeah, but if it's
We're
using
talking
junk
anyway.
data-
We'll see.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we never budgeted for them, and
No.
of course they want funds.
Yeah.
for it.
But the problem though, the problem between regular data out in the normal world and data in geoscience is we only ever really know maybe 1% if we're lucky.
Yeah.
So the way a lot of those programs work really well is because they basically have all the data.
Yeah.
Whereas if you only have
Yeah.
1% of the total available data, and really that's best case scenario, I think that's where they fall over all the time.
Well, one guy who would be,
That's okay. No, I was just saying, and we were talking about when you said data integration and understanding, that someone pointed out that the repository of the factual elements versus all the different models that go in, and you almost have to pull them apart from time to time because people bury them in and then they become fact. And it's, when I started in the business, like I said to young geophysicists, you lay your map down and then compare it to the geology. And it was the geophysics had to fit the geology. It wasn't the other way around. And interestingly, if you go back to the PDAC at the year that the Metallurgy Group won the Prospector of the Year for the Equinox Perseverance deposit, I gave with Michel Allard a talk at the same conference where we did the geophysics and the geologists did another one. But in that talk, I pointed out that we actually discovered it the year before. We had hired, I can't remember his name slips it, but we'd done magnetic modeling. We're just looking at all these, took all the signatures we saw from all the existing ore bodies, and lo and behold, we came with these two little bullseyes that sat out there. But in the geologic map, it was in the footwall.
Yeah.
But it was because after,
Yeah.
of course, we put a conductor,
Yeah.
flew the airborne, and it was a conductor that had to be tested. Then they found a graben, which
Yeah.
pushed the contact back.
That was a very good point,
But,
very good
but
point.
we couldn't find it.
I was there.
And when we brought it up, they said, well, no, that's what the footwall's all been, we've done all the geophysics here.
Yeah.
It can't be found. And now, the interesting part, we create this, it's called the Megatham discovery. But in actual fact, it had, I can't remember his name now, he did all the modeling around the new Hisco and all the different deposits there, and said, well, there's only 2 targets left that haven't been drilled, and these 2.
Yeah.
And I pointed that out to everybody, and they said, oh yeah, don't, it ruins the story. But we did put it out in the story to say that, and the point being said is, in this case, the model, which was the geologic framework, which everything was referenced to, was wrong. And it was preventing discovery for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And had we not had a research budget to test Megatham, and we didn't put a conductor on it,
Yeah.
it'd probably still be there today.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and this is a camp that had been worked for decades, and we were wrong. Right? I mean,
Anyways, to John's point about the machine learning, he didn't mention it, and we didn't put it in the article that's coming out in April. But if you look at the lab at the rig story, the amount of data they're going to be generating on the geochemical front, and the need to turn it around so quickly. You probably all know Richard Hillis. He's the guy in charge of designing the super gun, right? And James has been involved with the bullet that's going to deliver it in terms of geochemistry. They had a little like DirecTV antenna in Richard's presentation, and it goes up into space as DirecTV does and comes down. And, not to slight the young people, but there was this young man and young woman of color standing beside this computer screen as all of this effing data was coming down. And I'm thinking, this is not the model companies are going to entrust, having all of that money spent getting all of that information. If geologists don't keep up with the story, it's all going to go through Watson.
Yeah.
It has to, because people are going to need to know where to put the next drill within probably 2 hours of drilling the last one. Yeah. And I do not know a geologist who would be able to take that much information. I mean, other than developing massive software
don't
program.
kid yourself. Watson is extremely powerful. Okay. If you have any doubt,
when we did discover Abitibi seismic transects, there were 3 component geophones. They never looked at the other 2 components.
Yeah.
There's terabytes of data that have never been processed.
Yeah.
Well, the borehole stuff that
10
Christian was
times
showing.
that much when we do our.
You get 9 parameters in a borehole geophysical survey, and I
Yeah.
defy any individual to understand the complexity in those relationships.
So, yeah, maybe it's junk.
Or there's
in,
one
junk out,
guy-
but there's a lot of stuff that we
Well,
can't
there's the
process
difference between
because of the
data
way
and
we
information.
think.
Right?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is, John, is it's happening right now.
Yeah,
And
well,
I think
know-
these guys at Reflex are very well aware of it, and they've probably got a major software development program underway, because they're going to sell people on the concept that this is a good thing to do, but they're creating an enormous bottleneck in terms of data from the conventional approach for handling information. I mean, in the article we touch about regulatory issues. If you intersect an ore body, you get analysis coming off in real time. You don't have the 3 months to file something with the Security Exchange and put up in CEDAR.
Yeah.
You're going to have to be telling these people overnight something's happening.
So this, I hate to say this, but 10 years ago, when we first started putting the work that was coming out of the drilling roadmap that went into the drilling technology working group that happened to become the DTCRC.
Right.
In that working group that we spent 2 years working around the world, a few of us put up these things and said, we need to start talking to the regulators right now. We need to start talking to the financial companies, we need to start talking to the regulators about companies, because when this comes out, we can't react to it. We have to talk. That was 10 years ago. We haven't moved. on your data integration thing, which is stuff doing it rapidly, you're 100% right. So there's no way that a human brain can process the amount of data that comes out of the brain. It won't be able to. But it's coming, and the rest of the other industries in the world are taking this on.
Right.
And that's why Watson came out. Right? I think most people know that Watson was developed, and it probably wasn't with the best intentions. To search heaps and heaps of text.
But I mean, it's still
dots and voice files.
Watson, the version we have now, remember, Moore's law, cost of computation is half every 24 to 36 months. The next 3 generations of Watson is going to be exponentially more powerful.
Yeah, so we can't sit
So
here.
it's not just going to increase.
Yeah, so we can't sit here and say, oh, all this data that's coming out of the ground, we're not going to be able to do anything with it, so don't do it. Which is essentially what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
We've got to say, look, it's coming. Other people are working on ways to process them and integrate that data. We've just got to make sure that we're at the forefront of being able to provide the data in a way that they can do it.
Dan?
I was just going to, I guess, be a bit contrarian. I'm personally not as entranced by huge volumes of data for tactical decision-making and where to go with the next drill hole. Uranium, maybe we're a bit lucky because we've got radiometrics. We can tell whether we've got mineralization in the hole. We've got things like mineral spectroscopy that give us some insight into our alteration mineralogy. We've got geologists making structural observations. So pretty quickly with the existing tools we have, we know whether we want to step in on a drill hole. When I was in BMS exploration, a fellow named Paul Code taught me as a young geologist, and he said, you don't need to wait for your lithogeochemistry. If you see chloride, you've got magnesium enrichment. If you see sarsite, you've got potassium enrichment. If your feldspar phenocrysts are disappearing in your feldspar ferric rhyolite, you know you've got sodium depletion. So again, it comes back to if you've got trained geologists who know what are the critical observations for their particular deposit model, I think we already have the tools. Like, I don't need gigabytes of data coming at me from the drill bit telling me where to go with the next drill.
Yeah,
Hang on to those guys.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation.
But they're disappearing.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
know.
problem.
I know. It's
John?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that goes to this whole discussion also is a theme across today. We're talking about data, and what the first step is converting data into information. And the next step is information into knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that we're losing. So we're creating laptop-based people in GIS, which is a data repository you create later, and maybe you're getting some information in that. But the critical piece that's missing is the knowledge, and that's where, you know, you can have the person who can stand back and see the, you know, both the forest and the trees, right? That's the problem. When you get into the data, you're looking at the trees. But sometimes you do want to see the trees, but sometimes you have to see the forest. And what we're losing with the experienced people and the lack of proper training, all the data in the world, you know, if you don't tell the computer the framework to how it's going to look at that data, it can't turn it to information. It has another leap to turn that to knowledge. And I think, you know, it's probably why you're a little bit cynical with respect to, I don't need more data, you want more knowledge. And we're forgetting that there's a pathway to knowledge. And we're 90% we're talking about universities, and I do agree with the geoscience. That's why it's focused on good science. That you can always go back and put another layer and build on that platform. And someone else will come along with a new set of vision and convert that to a different set of information, which will hopefully lead to different knowledge. And that's really how this has to be thought of. But right now, I think where we're failing in our exploration business is we've, you know, every time there's a cycle, we purge our people. In some cases, companies have just purged entire division. They don't even ever bring them back. Yeah. They don't realize how important it was. Like John McGaughy used to work for me, and he said, we had to spin him out. But I also knew he was going to lose his job in a year if I didn't. And it was this continuous part of, well, do we really need this knowledge and this expertise in-house? Well, we can always buy it. And the problem with that is there is no one who's understanding now how their expertise is converting to knowledge. Yeah. Because he's now a consultant, and he's giving a lot of valuable information and expertise to people on how to manipulate data. But he used to be when I could sit down and talk to him about solving problems at Canada Potash, when Miranda still owned it. You know, with you know, we could solve a lot of good problems. But now, I don't know how many people actually sit down with him and go through their exploration agenda, because 99% of his business now is essentially 3D data, you know, he's 3D visualizer, data repository, commenter, whatever you want from him, but he's not very often involved in now defining where a drill hole goes in his career. And yet he was a very useful and insightful person when he was integrated into a team.
I'll just say, in the machine learning piece, I mean, you're generating an interpretation, and whether you do that through a machine-driven format, and Google actually Translate is a good example. It's kind of 90% correct.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, like in the government, where they're very sensitive about such things, you better dare not put up your Google Translate as your translation to the public-facing side.
Yeah, right.
But Google has recently built in more rules of grammar into it, as opposed to the brute force, which is what they used before.
Yeah.
So interpretation that comes out is only as good as the tool that you're using. If it's a shortcut that provides you a better interpretation, you should be more successful in exploration. It should mean that you survive as a company and thrive, as opposed to the others who are using wrong interpretations that fall by the wayside. So there is a little bit of that in this as well.
Last comment?
Yeah, just to go with that analogy, the geologists become sort of the linguists that know how the words go together. And so that's a way to QC the fact that it actually works properly. Because if you have bad data, maybe some of the associations actually don't make any sense, but the geologist can take that out.
I'll just reiterate, it's not necessarily bad data. I mean, my example of like high quality data next to each other misinterpreted is just as valid. And you don't throw away that data because, well, that's not what the geologist says. Bad data may become good data.
I'm looking 5 years out here, and I'm thinking, James is successful, generating all this stuff. What would happen if Watson read every copy of Econ Geology since the society was founded, and you gave him this data? Would he have a freaking clue? I'm talking Watson now. What that means? I would like to see that experiment run through, and think, here is supposed to be the repository, the greatest economic geology knowledge in the world, and if Watson can't figure out what's coming out of that drill hole, I think somebody's missed the cue. So anyways, last topic. Right?
Yeah, last topic. How to engage students. How to engage students. There was a comment that was made earlier on, Ken, I think, about that question, about the diversity.
Oh, I threw it out at the beginning. Yep.
Yeah, about diversity.
Several others mentioned problems with diversity.
Yeah, and evidently we know that a lot of the, most of the exploration between Australia and Canada is really where most of the exploration is done in the world. But you know that that is not because that those two countries have most of the endowment. You know that there is a lot of endowment. I know from experience that working in the developing world is very, very challenging because there's nothing to work with. Basically, you have to go out and develop your own data sets, and that's a lot more work. And under today's conditions of risk averseness, companies, there are very few companies that want to do grassroots exploration. I think for this, very few. Prefer to just buy a junior or go out and do something, latch on to a junior, buy them out or invest in them. But diversity means, what I mean by that comment is that diversity is also cultural diversity and getting people up to speed. I had the opportunity to work in Papua New Guinea with some native Papua New Guinean geologists. For me, it was extremely beneficial, both beneficial and profitable, to be honest.
And safer, no doubt.
Huh?
And a lot safer, no doubt.
Yeah.
Because he's still here to talk about it.
Well, they carry machetes around with them and AK-47s usually.
Can I ask the question of, in what do you want to engage students? Is it in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, how to get, I mean,
get them into the industry?
Well, part of this is this, I go back to a story. A colleague of mine, they supported the program at UBC, the GIF thing, and they had their annual presentation, and he was sitting across from a young man who was going to be finishing a master's degree. And he said, would you like to come work for our company? And the guy said, yeah, that sounds good. I'm looking for a job. And my friend said, well, good. And he said, and then the student said, well, what would I be doing? He said, for the first 2 or 3 years, you'd be out doing surveys and getting feel for the business and the rest of it. And the young man looked at my colleague and he says, no, I don't want to do that. And so my friend said, well, what do you want to do? He says, I want to run inversions. That's not engagement. That's basically continuing what you started with in your academic studies. It's a sterile environment that's sort of like, well, we don't need people to run models. We can almost do them automatically, at least at one level. So it's where does the seed get planted that the industry is actually a very, I had this mentoring thing I had to present to these geologists, which was a bit scary, I mentioned it earlier. But I had to think about what was the thing that I really liked about the business. And I said, I told them, I said, it gave me an outlet for my curiosity. I said, without that, all of the other things that I did, whatever, occupation, health and safety, doing interviews, KPIs, as long as I had problems that were engaging to me, it was like a chess game. I was addicted to it, and that's what keeps me in the business, is outlet for curiosity. And it doesn't mean every person in that room is going to be qualified for that, because a lot of them, one guy came down afterwards, and I thought, I didn't know what to frickin' say to him. He said, if I was prepared to go into a hostile environment, do you think I'd get a job? Would this put me in front of a queue? And I just, all I could say was, I said, well, companies generally don't look at going into hostile environments in the first place unless you're working for the CIA or, the SEAL Team 6. But for him to suggest that, I thought, holy mackerel, that's... And another guy said, which I really liked, he said, I needed some money, so I've gone up and, this was in Colorado, so I've gone up and found a place where I can get some ornamental rock, quarry stone. And I've actually set up a small business to sell this stuff. And he says, I'm making some money. He said, I want to get a job in exploration, but in the meantime, this is what I'm doing. And I thought, man, you're going to be running this show pretty soon. I mean, people like that are so valuable. They love the business, they want to get out and do something.
And they won't be stopped.
And they'll create the opportunity themselves if they have to. So how do you engage students to want to do the exploration part of it, not just the technology, the process part of it?
Can we ask the students?
Well,
recent students, like Anne.
Well, it's
and
exposure,
Dave.
it's not engagement.
Yeah.
It's exposure, it's not engagement. So I think you were saying, students graduate, they want jobs, they're engaged. They're not getting the exposure, and I would presume I had a pretty good upbringing in geology, where I worked with the geodesy during my undergrad. So I got the mapping after my second year and my third year, I mapped on Northern Baffin Island. And then I did Symposium, which is a 2-week field course put on by PDAC, where we take undergraduate students and they learn all about the industry. Prior to doing Symposium, all I wanted to do was academia, and I grew up in a small town in Ontario. I thought the mining industry was terrible. I had no idea about it. Doing Symposium, you see that things are actually changing. So I changed my mind about it, and when I graduated, I just went right into industry. And I studied, as contracts come in a downturn, someone who's new to the industry, I still worked consistently for 4 years until starting here. And it's the exposure of it. Like, students want to know how a drill runs, but universities don't teach that, because I wouldn't particularly say that would be, from my perspective, I don't know, but I feel like that would be difficult for universities to set up. Or, like, I went to Dalhousie, it's not a very big economic school, so we had one teacher who taught an economic class, and it was all about the deposit models. It had nothing to do with drills. You learned nothing about that. So when my first job on a drill, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and you're the geologist and you're the head of the rig, and it made no sense. And so from a student-wise, that was incredibly frustrating, because how do I feel confident in my job when I have no idea what this big machine is?
But we'll teach you how to work on a drill.
Yeah.
What we want is a student who is so engaged, they want to see that core that's coming out. They don't care about the mechanics of the drill, they want to see that core. That's the kind of young geoscientists we want. somebody who's passionate and hungry to be an exploration geologist, who's got that passion for discovery, who's got impatience to get the next, to look at the next piece of rock or the next piece of gold. And it comes from people like Ken there who just spoke very passionately. We need passionate mentors in the universities, not professors concerned about the next paper necessarily. And we need passionate teachers, passionate mentors. So the cream of the crop are really those students, not the ones with the best marks necessarily, those ones that are absolutely hungry to look at the rocks, to make those discoveries. That's what we want.
There's a feedback system here, right? We had one of the papers based on that. And the thing is that the students that we get in our systems right now that stay and do masters and PhDs, it's really expensive to bring them in the field and actually do real measurements. And so the ones that actually tend to be selected, it's like a natural selection kind of thing, but we end up with a lot of mathematics people that want to do inversion. So it's easy, like I have a passion for doing field work, but I really enjoy doing field work. It's hard for me to have 20 students though. I can't bring 20 students in the field. So, and I don't have 20 projects to actually, so if we want as an industry to have more field savvy people, we have to actually create those opportunities to actually, we won't drill a prospect in downtown Quebec City. We don't have a mine there. And we don't have drill rigs either. It's kind of funny because I actually teach my students about drill rigs. Just because of the DCRC, I've got a good understanding of how drill rigs works now. But you're right, we don't actually teach that generally.
Hold on. You want to go? Go ahead.
I'm one of the students, and I assume we're talking about undergrads, but like Anne, I had a similar start where I went and worked with the DCGS first, and that was one of the best things I ever did. And I've told other students after me, it's like if you have a chance, go work for a survey, because then you learn how to map really regionally, you get a better context.
I would agree with that also.
Yeah,
I had that experience.
When I went into industry, started at Hope Bay, because I had that regional mapping experience, I got kind of swooped up and put into the regional program. But then a lot of these other people that have the exact same education as me, they just got thrown straight on a drill rig. They didn't know anything about drilling. They also didn't understand the regional context of the drilling, so it was hard for them to get excited about the core that was coming out of the hole, because all they saw was altered rock and they had no idea what it meant. So there was no mentorship there, and I think that's really important, is that the students, industry time is money, and it's hard to take time to really walk people through the entire geology. And maybe you guys do that. I know every time someone says industry doesn't do that, you say we do that. But anyway, I noticed a lot of companies, and okay, that's another thing, is in Canada we're fortunate because the field season coincides with when students, their summer break, whereas I do teaching in Australia now to the undergrads, and it's not the same for them.
No.
The field season, it doesn't line up. That's the wet season. They can't drill half the time. And they don't quite have the opportunities that we do here.
That's a good point.
And also, usually they get chucked straight on an aircore rig or an RC rig, and then they have even less context of what they're drilling. All they see is chips. It's hard for them to feel engaged in the whole exploration process when all they are is a monkey logging chips. So it's, I think the mentorship is really important.
Yeah, I want to make a couple.
To you, John.
I mean, when I was just starting out in Broken Hill, I think one of the best things that was going on out there was that there was a senior guy out there who'd been basically working in Broken Hill for 20 years. All us junior guys logging core, he'd come visit us every day and give us a few pointers and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of talk about you send your juniors out to log core and then you get crap data and all that. Because they're not being mentored. And I think having industry mentors is actually probably more important than having good mentors in academia.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm mentoring a young geologist, well, not so young, but like an inexperienced geologist, and with logging, and the person really, I realized the person doesn't, they don't initially understand what is observable and what is not observable. And the key is that you have to teach people, well, you're going to have, you think that the important thing is to name this rock, but it's not. It's to describe it and describe what you see. what you see and and that's because that ultimately is what you need, because the rest we're going to do, and we're going to do whole rock analysis, we're going to do all other stuff on this thing, and but the one thing though you can observe is the things that are observable, and to record that, just like the contact relationships and stuff like that.
Oh, I had one more point.
Yep.
Which is, I know with the younger that works with me, I think a big part of keeping him engaged is just, work hard and play hard as well.
Yeah.
So just make it fun.
Yeah. John?
I don't even know anymore, but I know some of the University of Waterloo used to have co-op groups. Are there any universities that
we have a co-op undergrad program, but we haven't had much uptake on it.
Well, the problem is, like I said, you don't have, it used to be, that's normally where a senior company, because you need the mentoring to bring someone on. And now you have all these, well, this is the worst time now, where juniors, I think maybe you have to look at that market, because actually some of the best people out there for mentoring have, retired from the survey, now they run their own exploration company, or they were guys who got caught out in cycles, who could be excellent teachers. But you need to, maybe a different way, we got to rethink how we reach out to that group. As you said, right now, if they're using an employment season as their only means to find work, and that's, the one thing about some of these other programs, used to be even the federal government, where some of their tech people, you could actually bring them onto your staff, and it cost you a very nominal amount, and they'd work in your office for a period of time to help work on specific problems. Those were really valuable, but they really pandered to the kind of company who had the big project or the big idea that you could bring someone on for a couple of years to work on. So I think maybe we have to rethink how some of these programs align with the new reality of the market.
Yeah, well, that was part of the problem, the mining companies had their period, and we were not getting that anymore.
Yeah, and so if people are expecting to go in a co-op program and they realize there's nobody hiring them out, then they leave the program, right? It's a catch, then you're going to have a problem where people won't hang around. I think there's value in it, but I think it's probably something where industry and the government has to rethink what is the dynamic of the industry out there today. It's not the way it was. I remember when I was with Miranda, we participated in a lot of these projects, but then we had offices with people in who could mentor. We had field programs. There was always a senior person on site to work with the young geologist, and we probably need to rethink that if that's going to be a component. How do you train and mentor? I think the question is, in the framework of our current exploration society, who can, or how do you reach out to the qualified people to encourage them to pick up students and help them learn from the experts? And there's a number out there, like I said, who maybe at once, two people in a shop or one person in a shop, who still are very bright and experienced people who could be spending 6 months worth or 4 months worth would be hugely valuable.
Yeah. And just to let people know, on Wednesday, there's the mining industry, human resources, MIHR.
Okay.
They're in the midst of developing a whole bunch of new surveys that are going out to students, to industry juniors, service industry people working in the mining industry, that actually are covering a lot of the, what's the important reason that you work for this industry, what would engage you within it. So there will be some data that comes out of this probably within a year that, to a certain extent, should help shape some of those conceptions and misconceptions.
I just add also that in my geology program where I am right now, it's 50-50 women and men. And so the supply of women is there. So where do they go?
And so we have the data from all the universities who have kept it now for close to 30 years. It's only 20% engagement of women employed at master's and PhD level. It's about 50%, 50-50 now. But at the end of it, when it comes to hiring, there's far less women even from an application side, we notice within the geological survey. So we're asking the same question, what happens?
Where do they
Is
go?
it just because, you know, they're all in environmental sciences and they don't want anything to do with this, or is there some reason they drop out of the labor force and providing extra opportunities won't do them? You know, you can provide 100 more opportunities and still won't rectify it. So anyway.
Yeah, so at the OGS, there are quite a few of the new staff are female there, so there's improvement there. And at the grad level, I would say it's 40–50% female. What we're seeing now with Metal Earth in particular, from the university administration, Laurentian is officially a tricultural university, so we have English, French, and Aboriginal. So we're seeing, well, how can we engage Aboriginal? I think that's a really big piece for everybody going forward, because we're not going to make inroads into, you know, getting involved and doing exploration in the north until we can engage the Aboriginal communities. So we're sort of thinking about, well, how can we get, you know, young Aboriginals who have the abilities to take Earth Science as an undergrad program, and maybe they need a year to sort of upgrade their science skills to be able to take first year university. We don't know yet, but we need to do something. I think we all need to do something in those areas.
So I agree with you, it's a big issue. Big issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, MDIE is a funny place because our students have no option but to be engaged with industry because all our funding comes from industry.
Yeah.
They're all tied in with their research project. The interesting thing is that we actually have the same problem as industry. In the dark preference is to actually pick up students with some sort of experience rather than completely raw undergraduates. And trying to find anybody who's got any level of knowledge or experience is difficult.
Interesting.
Our HR department, Human Resources Department, has pointed out to us one of the issues we have with the demographics and younger people coming in is they're impatient. They want to basically do things. They want a lot of changes. They want promotions quickly. They want your job, Dave. Well, that's right. They do want my job, but we've also touched on that it takes time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You know, they come in as young geoscientists and they're sort of in that inductive.
Well, I mean, and plus there's the issue of the professional affiliation, and the fact that you have to be 5 years as a practitioner before you can be a professional geoscientist. And so we have that, in a way, we have that playing for us, right? So we have these juniors, these junior geologists coming in that would like to be the present company CEO, but at the end they have to spend 5 years, and we have a responsibility to mentor them as professionals during those 5 years to make sure that when they get at the culmination of that they are ready to assume their
Then
role.
what happens? Now they're no longer that geoscientist in training. They've done their 5 years. So where's my promotion? Where's the change in my duties? Where do I get the big bump? So HR, tries to educate us. The engagement issues that we have with staff is in part demographic. We can't. There's things that we just can't do as geologists, as explorationists to improve it. Demographics are changing. People want it sooner. They don't want to wait for 15 years to be made chief geologist. So that's an issue we face.
No, I can see that. Any?
I was just going to
just
say,
a quick one. Then
as Craig Hart brought up earlier, one thing that seems to work well in Australia is the coursework masters, the MTech.
Okay,
which
coursework masters.
It just provides, finally undergrads in Australia, they graduate after 3 years and they don't really know much of anything. And then they can at least go into this coursework masters, and then they go from university to university and learn from the best of the best. You don't agree with it, or?
No, they can't. It's finished. It doesn't happen anymore. It's been cancelled.
Oh, they cancelled it.
That's right. Minerals Council of Australia were funding it, pulled it.
Okay.
And now they're funding something called Nexus.
Nexus, okay. It seemed to work well because they could go
How did that
learn.
up school to go though?
What's that?
Ken,
They had a field school for.
you gonna give us some
learning,
final words?
Yeah,
Whatever, so it's like.
Bye.
there's people starting to hover outside, they want our room. Ann warned me about this, 5 o'clock. So, we have made an effort, Anne's taken some notes, get some documentation, we've got our flip charts here, we've recorded a few things that might be intelligible. But Charles and I wish to thank all of you very much for making the time. What's going to be a long week for probably most of us. And I congratulate those that deflected their travel schedules to arrive on site. Yeah, exactly. Now time for a beer. So anyways, thank you all. It was personally very interesting and satisfying. I think I in particular was quite nervous last fall when I put this up to Charles. I said, oh man, there's sort of this sea state change going on. The footprints is winding up, and John and Harold have got their wonderful project in Sudbury, and I thought, why don't we just have a yak about some of this stuff and just see what, wet the finger and see what people think about it, because it doesn't really come up in these meetings. The ones like I've been, the tactical problems come up, but not kind of the vision as to where we want to be. And that was, I looked at the original CMIC diagram. I mean, Mickey Mouse could have put that together, for Pete's sake, half of it was stolen from the Australians, I'm sure. Anyways, that's all right. Imitation is the best form of flattery, right? So, anyways, thank you all very much. Have a great PDAC. Safe journeys.
Thank you.